Hello, I'm Paki Wieland, and I have two guests, Sherrill Hogen and Deborah Yaffe, and we're going to be conversationing this morning, or today, and the name of this program is yet to be decided. It may be The Good Troublemakers, it may be Change Makers. We don't know yet, but we'll see what comes of this conversation. First of all, I want to just say to both of you, I'm so happy you're here. Mm-hmm. We're going to be talking about Israel-Palestine. I think it's one of the hottest issues right now, one of the most unresolved, one of the most painful for our country at this present moment. It's not as though we haven't had our own genocides, and our complicity with Israel in their genocide now is nothing new. But this is where we have an opportunity to do it differently. And so, since you're both wonderful activists, I thought you'd be the perfect people to start talking about this. So maybe, Deb, you'd like to start by telling us where we are right now.
Well, I'm honored to be with both of you, longtime peace activists, and also your involvement in Palestine, stretching back, years, if not decades. And personally, it's a moment where, I can't look away. We've been witnessing a genocide live on our phones, on television, and if you haven't seen it, you're not paying attention. So right now, we're over 50 days of a siege in Gaza, and that means no humanitarian aid, no food, no medicine is getting into the people there. And, it's more international war crimes, and it's horrible. And I think all of us here, we've been working on an arms embargo to stop U.S. arms and funds going to Israel, to fund this genocide. I'm going to defer to you, Sherrill, just to talk about what's happening in the West Bank right now.
Well, okay. I've been to the West Bank 18 times over the last 23 years. I have dear friends there. It's easy to feel a lot of despair and agony for the danger that they're in. Because what's happening right now is, as they say it, a Gazification of the West Bank.
A Gazification of the West Bank?
Yes. Because Israel has started finding the places of I don't want to say most vulnerability, because the whole country of Palestine is vulnerable to Israel's weaponry. But they've started to attack the refugee camps where there is an armed resistance, a small number of young men usually who are using their international right to defend themselves against a military occupation, which Israel insists it can stamp out. But the methods used to stamp it out are those that we see in Gaza: bombs, tanks, military presence, snipers, destruction of infrastructure. And one example to highlight that is in the Jenin refugee camp, which is one of the ones most known for its militancy over the years. It's in the north of the West Bank. In this year, in January, Israel bombed the refugee camp. First it told people to leave. It gave them minutes to leave their homes, so most of them left with almost nothing. And then they were told to evacuate, and they did. 40,000 people from one refugee camp are now homeless, and they've been told they cannot go back. Israel has destroyed their homes, has demolished them with bombs and tanks, bulldozers, and now they're widening all the streets so that tanks can more easily pass through, because the refugee camps, as you may know, have very narrow streets because of the overcrowding that exist there. We can go into what a refugee camp is, because I think many listeners may not know that.
I think it's really important. You know, when we think about a refugee camp, when I think about a refugee camp, I think of something much smaller. And you talk about 40,000 people in a refugee camp. Just try to fathom that. You know, that's just part of Jenin.
Right. So we can try to connect this with visuals that people are getting these days. They see Gaza on the screen, right? We see this Al-Mawasi camp on the edge of the sea where people have been crammed in, many more than 40,000.
Right.
Maybe more like 100,000, 200,000 people live in this nothing of a shelter. Well, there is no shelter, really. So yeah, refugee camps are called camps because they were started in 48 when, after Israel forced everybody to leave their land, they were homeless. They began to put up tent cities. Actually, the UN did that. The UN set up tent cities. Well, after a while, the tents obviously weren't going to cut it, so they started building cement block buildings, but very small ones.
Yeah.
And that's how come we have refugee camps, and they still have that name.
Yeah, but I didn't mean to interrupt that flow. So what are you hearing from Jenin?
Well, I have friends in Nablus, which is a city south of Jenin by about, 10 miles, 15 miles. And what they're telling me is the latest news is that now, this is new, in order to leave the city to go anywhere, they need a permit from the Israeli army. This is as of a week ago. What's different about that is because before this, if you wanted to go out of the city, yes, you had to go through checkpoints, usually, or a roadblock, or there'd be some interference with your movement.
Yes.
But you didn't need to go to the military first and say, please give me a written permit so that I can leave. What they're saying is that it's no longer safe anywhere. Because if you're Palestinian, you are a legitimate target for settler violence, even for army violence.
Yes.
So it's a very distressing time, and they see this as not yet as the volume is not yet as it is in Gaza, but it's going there. And Jenin refugee camp is not the only one that has been demolished this way.
Right. Yeah. So there you are.
Yeah, and why don't we hear about it? You know, you don't see it.
Right.
Yeah, the West Bank covered in the New York Times or in mainstream corporate media, right?
Well, I think our media is very good at distracting us from or following maybe the lead of some military people, but if we're bombing Gaza, we're not paying attention to what we're doing to Lebanon or to Yemen. If we're invading Lebanon, we're not paying attention to what's happening in Jenin. If we're invading Jenin, it goes on and on.
And then, of course, we could just look at all the things that are happening domestically, and that's a total distraction from what we're doing internationally.
Right.
Yeah.
And this after the so-called ceasefire, which Israel, broke several times. So it really wasn't a ceasefire.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's where you started, Deb, talking about what's happening now.
Yeah.
The cutoff of food, the cutoff of everything, and that's been for 50 days. And and this recording is in late April, and we don't know how much longer this will go on, and what the people of Gaza or the rest of Palestine can endure.
Right.
And I know just today, the International Court of Justice was convening. And what strength that has when you've got the empire, the United States, blockading, vetoing the whole rule of law is undermined.
Yeah, you're mentioning the International Court of Justice convening, which is it's a very good thing that they're convening, but it's interesting that they're discussing whether or not there is a genocide. Well, it seems so clear and evident to the naked eye that there is a genocide, but still there are different ways that has to be, I guess, verified for history. But the fact that it's so very obvious, and in fact this morning I spent a little time on my laptop and I saw an article headlined, "Rafah no longer exists." And it really chilled me. It's like Rafah is a city that was like something like 250,000 people in Gaza, in the southern part of Gaza. And it isn't there anymore. So I think, what if we woke up in the morning and we were told Northampton no longer exists? It was bombed overnight. There isn't a single structure standing. And of course, all the people that were living there and sleeping there are gone. It would be like that.
Yes.
It isn't there anymore. A whole city is wiped out. And I think that's because what seems obvious, again, to the naked eye, is that Israel intends for the area where anybody can live in Gaza to shrink to such an extent that it really isn't livable, and that everybody then will just decide to leave. But they don't understand Palestinians.
So tell us a little about that before we move on. What do you mean we don't? What do you know about the Palestinians after your years and years and deep relationships with so many Palestinians?
They have a love for their land that we barely can understand. I think indigenous people anywhere understand that. Native people here in this country understand it. People who grew up on a farm maybe understand it. But mostly we are urbanized and we don't know what it means to be attached to the land the way Palestinians are. They love their land. They love their olive trees. They feel like they're their children. And that's not to say that they don't adore their children, because that's something else that's very typical. They have large families. They want large families. They love children. And so all these deaths of children in Gaza is just so devastating. So I don't even know where this train of thought started, but my friends, they love inviting you in. They're people that invite the stranger.
Yes.
And that's a beautiful interlink between that and the Jewish religion, where the stranger is always welcome. And I'm bringing that in because sometimes this whole conflict is presented as if it was Arabs or Palestinians against Jews. And it's not about Jews. It's about an Israeli political policy of extermination. But it's nothing to do with Judaism. Nothing.
Yes.
Judaism is a beautiful faith. And the stranger is welcome. So anyway, there's that overlap.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear you talk about that connection to the land. You feel it. Right. Yeah.
I felt that, just when I was there, when I was in Gaza, I mean, when you say Rafah doesn't exist, we spent so much time at the Rafah border trying to get in the second time. But that was the place of entry for all of us, for so many of us. And I stayed with the family in Rafah. And the mother had two sons and a husband. And on Sundays, she would go from one jail to the other to the other. Her two sons and husband had all been arrested for nothing, for acting out their being under occupation. And that's one of the words that we don't talk about much is occupation.
And you're talking about before October 7th. You're talking about when?
2009.
9. So back then,
yes,
there were this situation where half the family would be in prison.
Yes.
And it's so important to understand what was Palestine before October 7th, because I think it's hard to even remember.
Well, I think that's one of the real issues that when Phyllis Bennis was here recently, she referred to, and we've had these conversations about where you start the clock. You know, it's so important to understand. I mean, first of all, you know, the Palestinians' love of their land, and I think of that, and I'm going to digress for just a minute about Trump and Musk, who have no love of this country and our traditions, our Constitution, and all its flaws. But there's some aspiration that so many of us have that I think has compelled us to be involved in the issues we are. That we aspired to the ideals of this country, and you know, and I think when I visited Gaza, and when you talk about your time with the Palestinians, there is that similar aspiration. Theirs is rooted in the place they are. You know, this is home. What is home?
Right.
You know.
And you asked, you know, what my friends are saying, and I keep deviating from, but they're not going to leave. They see what's coming. They know the settlers are just there, just around the corner, or just down the road, or in the refugee camp called Balata Camp, which is right adjacent to the city, and where I first met the family I'm closest to there. They see it coming, and they're not, and they know it's, you know, they might not survive it, but they're not uprooting. They're not leaving the country, and they could. They could get. They have visas, or they can get them. Not everyone can leave the country, but they're not. They don't want to leave. And the Gazans are saying the same thing. There they are with 50-some days of no life-saving or life-giving anything, and they're not leaving. They're not going to volunteer to go, oh yeah, I'll go live in Jordan. No, that's not my country. That's not my land.
You have children talking about their own death. You know, that talking about their own death, like an 8-year-old. I mean, acknowledging that, seeing it. And, you know, we're talking about as retired therapists. I mean, what is that like? We have a whole population of people that are so, you know, traumatized. I mean, it's intergenerational. And, as an American, I mean, just witnessing what the Israeli government is doing and being aware that, you know, the army has been using, you know, sniper shots, I mean, for children. And there's evidence of this. And yet we continue to support Israel like no other country.
And it's fascinating. It's, you know, and that's probably not the best word, but it is both amazing, fascinating, and most appalling that our Congress continues to vote money to Israel.
Yes. Yeah. It's a mystery. I mean, it's something, you know, as a Jewish person identifying as a Jew, what is this connection with Zionism and the West and America? You know, this marriage, what is it? I mean, it is a long-term relationship. Is it about empire, sharing resources? I mean, colonial powers, but it's something that as a Jew, I think a lot of Jews are coming to, you know, question this relationship. And if Zionism isn't Judaism, then what is Judaism, you know?
Yes. Well, I think, you know, as Sherrill made this reference earlier to some of the beauty of Judaism that has been totally overwhelmed by Zionism. And And I'm curious, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about the distinctions between Judaism and Zionism.
I mean, yeah.
And how we can encourage people to leave the field of Zionism,
right,
and really see it for what it is. And so what is it?
Yeah, it's an ethno-nationalist state. You know, it's a state. A government. It has nothing to do with the religion. The religion is over, 5,000 years old, right? And so Zionism is, you could say, we could go back to, 76 years or the Balfour, Declaration, but it's not that old. And Zionism, somebody who I listen to and I read is Dr. Pape, Wieland Pape. And,
one of our heroes.
One of our heroes. Jewish, Israeli, no longer living in the 48, but talks about, what does Zionism need? What is to survive? They need to dehumanize Palestinians, and you need anti-Semitism, the weaponization of anti-Semitism, which we're seeing right now. It's being used so that we're complicit in a genocide. So that we say, yes, we need to do this. We need to arm ourselves and use brute force and military occupation because there is so much hatred for the Jews. And it's a different form of hatred. That's the kind of propaganda that we're seeing, and this conflation with protests, pro-Palestinian protests, and anti-Semitism. And Zionism is very different. I mean, for me, some of the essential teachings of Judaism is that all life is sacred. All life is sacred, that our solidarity is with other people. We can relate to, other people's liberation struggles because we've been through it, right? We were enslaved, thousands of years ago, but we remember. And, I grew up a Zionist in the 1960s. That's when I think it was being, talked about. The state of Israel was like this social democracy, something that we looked up to. And the kibbutz, communal living. I never heard the word Palestinian. I didn't know there were Palestinians, until I became an adult. We celebrated the 6-Day War. It was, looking back on it, it's horrifying to think about. But there was no Judaism without the State of Israel. And I think that is like an American construct. That is not really true. I mean, for me, it's a journey. It's been a journey of just learning history of Israel, of the Palestinians, learning from Palestinians, listening to Jewish historians who question Zionism. And I would call myself an anti-Zionist. Because
so it's a very interesting travel, and I often have thought of myself as a school girl, an elementary school child in the 40s, being a little Christian Zionist.
Yes.
Because we heard about the Holocaust. We heard about, I read Elie Wiesel, Anne Frank. I mean, heartbreaking for young, open children, loving children. And so I could identify with that, how we began, and then how we moved to becoming anti-Zionist.
Right.
And how I think one of the big questions is, I think, how to address people who are still on the edge, because there was so much indoctrination, both within the Jewish communities and in the country at large.
Absolutely.
I walk around the halls of Congress, and there's "We stand with Israel, we stand with Israel, we stand with Israel" all over the walls.
Yeah.
So that's part of the propaganda.
Yes.
But
There's a fabulous book that Amy Kaplan wrote, and Our American Israel, which kind of looks at the psychological and the cultural relationship that the U.S. has with Israel. You know, starting back, she's kind of takes apart looking at Exodus. Remember the film Exodus?
Oh,
Paul Newman was like, you know, the blue-eyed, blonde-haired Jew. I mean, who could believe that? But
we all loved him.
yeah, but we all loved him. There was this melding of, you know, it was almost like a cowboy film or something, you know.
Yes.
But I think for me, seeing the genocide, learning from my friends who went to Israel, who visited the West Bank in the 80s, learning about what was really happening, just helped to sort of, you know, put a crack in that, you know, Zionist bubble, that wonderful little Zionist bubble, that we needed Israel to be safe. And so, you know, for me, it's been a journey, it's a learning experience, but I think right now, in the last 18 months, I've been in circle with other Jews who are anti-Zionist, non-Zionist, questioning, and we get to kind of talk together and create that space where it's, you know, we can talk about our upbringing, our relationship to Israel, we can talk about the horror that we're seeing. There's grief, we can grieve together, and in a way that we can do it with each other, that maybe it's uncomfortable to do in
Yes.
sort of a different environment. And so I think that's happening more, especially with younger Jews, that I see, you know, Israeli American students, rabbinical students, speaking up around this, you know, conflation with anti-Semitism and saying, I do not feel antagonized by Palestinians, by Palestinian protests. That is not what is threatening me. It's white supremacy. That's what's threatening me. That's where anti-Semitism comes from in this country. You know, and really standing up.
So little understood. So little understood. It's so important that we mention white supremacy as that's where anti-Semitism. That's where Jews are in danger.
Exactly.
That's the anti-Semitism we should be talking about, and we are not.
And it's everywhere. I mean, it was just like in 2017, you know, Charlottesville.
Right.
Anti-Semitism, you know, was there, and the Unite the Right protest, and that activist, and I'm forgetting her name, you know, was killed. So
Heather Heyer.
Thank you.
Yes.
Heather Heyer.
I wanted to ask you, have you seen the film Israelism?
Yes.
Israelism is a great documentary about how this country has become absorbed by the idea that Israel, right or wrong, Israel has to be saved. It's a very, people should see that. And it's very readily available now, Israelism, it's called.
Yeah.
There's several things you said that I keep making my little notes, because weaponizing anti-Semitism, weaponizing standing up for Palestinian rights has become now a no-no. You know, you can like Mahmoud Khalil is still in prison. He was arrested, I think, March 9th off the streets, just taken away by masked, unidentified people in an unmarked car. What country does that happen in? It's really chilling. But it says a lot about where this is going if we don't, you know, stand up to it.
Let me ask you about that, standing up to it, because so many students, so many people on campuses, for example, have been accused of being anti-Semitic, and I mean, I loved, there was an experience. I was at the courthouse in Belchertown where the UMass students were taken. This was the first big demonstration, and when they came out of the courthouse, this was their pretrial hearing. When they came out of the courthouse, there were reporters there, and one of the reporters was asking, well, what about the Jewish students? And this leader of the gang said, well, I am Jewish. And I thought that was so wonderful, because this was not about Judaism. You know, this is about the state of Israel and its crimes that are so reminiscent of the crimes of the Western Europeans in this continent.
Yes.
You know? And it's an opportunity, I think, and I'm going to really go off here, for us to reckon with our own genocidal history.
That's right.
You know, with our own history of genocide against the native people, the indigenous people that you so beautifully referenced early on. You know, that their love of the land and what the white Western colonizers did.
Yeah.
And I think it's an invitation to us, white North Americans, to say, oh, yeah. So when I'm condemning what the Israelis are doing, and I certainly do, it invites me to look at my own history, the history, our history, and how do we make reparations there.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, as colonizers, right? You know, one thing that brings me strength is I'm doing some partnership with some indigenous projects here, and just looking at the Nipmuc who have been here, you know, uninterrupted for like probably 12,000 years. I mean, if you go back to Paleo-Indians, but on the same land, you know, for that long, through generations of, you know, I mean, genocide, and are still here and are strong and looking at land back projects, and so it really kind of gives me some strength, or just some sense of hope, and that and recognizing the connection to the land. But going back, I just wanted to say something about Jews, and that Jewish Voice for Peace has been a safe place for me, or a place of just being in solidarity with Palestine, with not just Jews, but lots of people who are involved in Jewish Voice for Peace. So, and they've been great activists, you know, for Palestine, and out there doing civil disobedience. And so when, you know, you have the right or people who are critical and saying this is anti-Semitism, you know, when we say river to the sea, that we're offending Jews, well, it's Jews who are also calling. River to the sea means that everybody is free, you know, on that land. So it's not saying that we want to exterminate Jews.
You know, while we're trying to put things in perspective, which we're doing various different levels, it occurred to me to say that we're focused in this country right now on our own constitutional crisis and on our abuse of immigrants and many horrors that are happening, which some of us experience as happening for the first time. But it's not the first time for most black and brown people in this country. They're kind of used to this. Which we're not used. Me as a white American, I'm not used to this kind of abuse of my rights or abuse of my space, and I have to recognize that a large segment of the population has been suffering under that kind of abuse for a long time.
Yes,
that's right.
Yeah,
I kind of wonder about, you know, in the beginning of this genocide, was this, you know, a warning? What if our government had responded differently? Would we be in this place right now where our constitutional rights are being, you know, threatened? If we had an arms embargo, if we, you know, withdrew our support, from Israel, it just seems, would we be in the same place? I mean, just connecting.
So what do you imagine? How could this how could this country have reacted differently then? And of course, or you could say, so how could it do so now? When we have the majority. I mean, it was so telling. Again, there were months ago there were 19 members of Congress who voted to not send money for arms to Israel, and then more recently it dropped down to 15. And I think, what is it? You know, and I don't even know who the 4 are who changed their minds, who voted differently, but I think this is really the crucial question: is how do we turn things around, become the change agents to this country? How do we speak to this country to say, wake up and look what we're doing? You know, that what we're doing is genocide. Is we're complicit in genocide, and by removing ourselves from stopping that support, we help tip the balance. We help correct our own national history.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a way that with the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil and Ramesa Öztürk, that maybe some people that, you know, they didn't want to call what Israel's doing genocide are seeing that free speech is now affecting, it's affecting them. You know, these were students who were not the most radical. I mean, Mahmoud Khalil was appointed by, you know, Colombia to do mediation.
A negotiator,
you know, right, to be the negotiator. And so I think some of these issues around free speech are kind of crossing, maybe making some bridges there. I'm hoping, and bringing people into the discussion around, you know, Palestine and activism around Palestine. Do you think?
Well, I don't know. You know, the other thing that when we talk about genocide, I've often, if someone says, I can't say that word, I can't use it. So, well, how about war crimes?
Right.
You know, because because Israel is committing war crimes, and we, the United States government, is complicit in those war crimes.
Yes.
I mean, that's a question.
I'm thinking about, this is not directly answering that, but it's so important where we get our information from.
Yes.
Right? If we're dependent on the mainstream media for what's happening in the world, we're missing the truth, not just missing information, we're missing the truth. So anyone who wants to, who maybe listening to us and is thinking, that's not the way I see things, it's like, seek out alternative news sources. Look for them, because they're going to tell you, are going to give you a different picture. And without that information, without that additional information, the lies appear to be the truth.
Yes.
You know, so we have to be very diligent in seeking the truth, because those in power have investments in us not knowing the truth.
That's right. Manufactured consent. Yes. I mean, the New York Times, there are several, there are activists who look at the what's being covered in the New York Times and the language that's being used, and how often Palestine or Palestinians are not mentioned or even, you know, allowed to write articles there. So the coverage, but I just kind of I keep my New York Times subscription just to see what is surfacing, you know, what kind of news is surfacing. I mean, when that, you know, medical aid worker, the 15 medical aid workers were assassinated in Gaza, you know, the only reason why that story came about was because one of the aid workers filmed his death and was saying to his mother, I'm sorry, you know, I'm sorry that this is what I chose, and please forgive me. This is how I chose to serve my people.
Just to explain a little more, because that aid worker who videoed his death, he and all the other people and their ambulances were buried and not found for a week. When they dug up the bodies and they found his cell phone on his body.
Wow.
And he had filmed up until he was killed. He had filmed what had happened.
Oh my God.
So the lies Israel tried to tell about, they don't know what happened, they don't know how it happened, they don't know where it happened, were totally exposed by the fact that this one worker who was dead, his cell phone had recorded what did happen.
Thank you for filling in that detail, especially how their bodies were buried with bulldozers.
They covered they even buried the ambulances and the rescue cars. They wanted to hide all the evidence. Why? Because they knew what they had done was not going to be looked upon favorably in the public eye. If you line people up and shoot them, the public might say, "Oh, that doesn't look so good," but that's what they did.
Yeah. So thinking about these, the New York Times and other sources, where do you get your news?
Well, I insist for Palestine that every day I check Mondo Weiss, I check the Electronic Intifada, I check Democracy Now!
Democracy Now!, by the way, is broadcast on this in the GCTV broadcast. Democracy
Excellent.
Now!
That's great. Good for
give
GCTV.
Them a shout out.
So those are just some, and then I look for local groups that are active that may know something's happening that I'm not aware of, like Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a wonderful source of information and of protests. I'll look to the Trap Rock Center for Peace and Justice. They also post events that are coming up, and sometimes an article if something's written in the recorder, they'll post it. And I'm trying to think. I access other sources like the Intercept, and then there's the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions has a weekly list of articles. So these different groups choose maybe a different thing to focus on, but they all are very revealing about what's going on. Personal stories that get told.
Yes.
I've been so blown away by the artistry in the writing of so many individual journalists or young people who are learning to write, and they express their own story, and it makes you cry. They're just so eloquent, and they're preserving the truth for the future. They may not survive it, but they are preserving it.
Yeah. You mean from Gaza, the stories that you hear. It's amazing. Electronic Intifada. I mean, I've been listening to them because I came from the Bay Area, so they were on KPFA and before, but now they're doing their own thing. But I love the way they really tell you what is happening on the ground, what day it is, 500 and so, and what's happening in Gaza. And then they'll go to some stories of just from Gaza of, what do we want to say? Resilience. I mean, but just stories from the people there. And it's really... Yeah,
resilience is no longer a sufficient word, I think. I mean, it's hard to... It's hard.
Samud.
Samud. That steadfastness, It's,
But let me just ask you, you've both referenced the Electronic Intifada, and so how do people access that, our listeners, if they're saying, I've never heard of that? How do they access the Electronic Intifada?
You can Google it.
You too.
Just Google it. Okay, because I think that's the other thing, the word intifada.
Yes.
This gets this reaction sometimes. So what's the definition of an intifada?
It's an uprising.
It's an uprising.
Means uprising.
Yes.
And there have been 2 official intifadas in Palestine. The first one was largely nonviolent civil disobedience, strikes, hunger strikes, people protesting, marches, leafleting. A lot of leafleting went on. People were really well organized. And then the second one was largely violent. And that was the one that everyone remembers because some of the militants were blowing up buses with civilians in them and cafes, and it was very scary.
Yeah. I think, when you mention uprising, one of the things that I think is missed by and large by the mainstream media is the Palestinians are an oppressed and a people who are under occupation. They are an occupied people. And I wonder, I think about our listeners, or people who are watching this and say, it's not, there's not a parity. It's not Israel and Lebanon. It's not, God knows there's no parity with, the U.S. and Yemen, but there's, the idea of two nation states or any kind, even Russia and Ukraine are two sovereign states. Ukraine was not occupied by Russia. And I think the reaction to that, the first Intifada, the second Intifada,
and October 7th.
And October 7th.
As a reaction to the occupation.
Yes. And so for me, I try to find every alternative to violence. And whether I look at the history of the Second World War and what could have been done to, there's so many things in hindsight, of course. But right now, with what is going on with an occupied people who are being exterminated, what can we do, and how can we further inform people? Back to your being the change agent. How do we inform people to take action? That I was at the rally a few weeks ago and mentioned that if it's Social Security or the deportation or any of those issues, that they're all connected, and they are all connected to Gaza. They are all connected to Palestine, and that we don't have one without the other. And so I want the people who are uprising now in this country, and it's certainly, it's heartwarming to see people standing up, and I want them to include Gaza.
Yes.
I think, if people get the right education and they care at all about, fellow human beings, and then action kind of flows out of that. But sometimes you feel isolated. You feel like maybe you're the only one who knows, or the only one who cares, or the only one. So it's very important for people to join with their neighbors or their whoever they're drawn to, but to form groups, not just to be isolated in what you think or what you think needs to be done. So education and organizing together come before action. And I think there is action in this country. It's beginning to happen. The pushback against the current administration is really showing itself in so many different places. It's not always connected to what's happening in Palestine. But as Phyllis Bennis pointed out when she was doing her book tour recently, the hands-off protests that happen all across the country on April 5th.
Yes.
I read it was 1,300 different protests were known about, and I'm sure there were others that weren't known about, involving something like 3 million people.
Yeah.
That's people power.
Yes.
That's us.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it is happening. We have to keep it going. We have to increase those numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it makes a difference for us to be at these hands-off rallies. You were there. I was there at our local hands-off rally. And just to show we are supporting Palestine, we have been here for 18 months, and we are making these connections. And so not to be afraid to learn that you're not going to offend people, or maybe you will, but maybe you'll be the change agent, right? You'll become educated on Palestine, and you can start having the discussion with other people, with other Jews, if you're afraid of offending, Jews. standing up for against a genocide isn't anti-Semitic. I mean, just think about that. You know, the use of the word, oh, what am I doing? I mean, isn't that a Jewish value? You know, isn't that a humanitarian value?
Yes.
I see a wrong happening. International law is being broken. You know, I'm standing up against it. This is something that we should all believe in. And so I think people have been scared to speak up about, you know, against what Israel is doing.
Yeah, what Phyllis pointed out, which she has the perspective that a broader perspective that I'm able to get, but she said people turned up at all of the rallies, or many of the rallies, with the Palestinian flag, with the keffiyeh, with signs supporting Palestine, even though it wasn't one of the calls that was that was made when we were all called to protest that day, hands off everything. Palestine was not named. I hope that in the next major national event it will be, but what Phyllis pointed out was that neither was it rejected, neither was there any place where someone said, well, that issue doesn't belong here.
Right.
Nobody said that.
The glass is half full.
So we turned up with our flags, with our keffiyehs, and we were received. So again, next big turnout, we need to.
And I think that is one of the challenges, to not have the national issues overshadow the international. And you know, and I mean, of course, I think the biggest right now is Gaza, is Palestine. But I was watching just recently this onslaught against the Yemens.
Yes.
And you know, it's so tragic. So I want to include them to.
I mean, look at them. You know, in Yemen, standing up for Palestine. I mean, having the courage to do that. You know, they have. It's been just incredible.
And they're suffering terribly for doing it. Just the news was this morning about actually an internment, a prison in Yemen was bombed, and something, how many hundreds?
Yes.
I don't know. There were 600 people there, and I don't know how many were killed. One more thing about the connection between Palestine, this issue, and our domestic crisis, because we are in a crisis. I thought, well, okay, how does this relate? And what I came up with is, if we can do it to Palestinians, why not do it here?
Yes.
And we are doing it to Palestinians because it's our government that's providing the bombs.
Yes.
And we're the ones that are making this genocide possible. And if we can do it over there with our power, no problem.
And I think that's, you know, this is, we can do it in Palestine. If we can do it to students, to foreign students, to
immigrants,
can we do it to, if we can do it to immigrants? And already we're hearing the administration saying we will do it to citizens.
To citizens,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about, you know, in terms of just looking back 18 months and watching, you know, the genocide and escalate, and that it's going to come home to roost, some of the ways that, oppression is happening. But, you know, and also, I mean, we could look at this $1 trillion military budget, you know, in the U.S., and so that's a way of making the connection. Really, you know, when, we have so many programs are just being, you know, gutted, and Head Start.
Yeah, it's really, it is obscene. That we continue. They continue to add more money to the military budget. I mean, you know, I remember a few years ago the Congress wanted X billions of dollars, and the administration said, "Oh, we'll add some more." You know, it goes back to that brilliant tactic that people had to have in every congressional district a piece of that pie, a piece of that military pie. And so it's jobs.
Yes.
You know, it's, I mean, we do need a revamping. And, you know, and maybe as as they've come for the Palestinians and the refugees and the immigrants, and they'll come for us, that maybe, just maybe, enough of us will say, wait, no. We're on the wrong track. Let's look at where we're going and turn it around.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And I mean, this is the voice crying in the wilderness, because there's so much. I mean, there is so much acquiescence to, well, we have to have a strong military.
Yeah.
You know, and
I think, though, that when people realize how much the military is gobbling up of our resources, at the same time that we're losing Head Start, maybe Social Security, all of the schools, infrastructure, all of the things that are not getting funded, because all that money is going to the military. That's something that it puzzles me that more people haven't realized that the way things are being run here is backwards. You know, we're willing to pledge more and more billions to send arms to Israel or to build more munitions, and we're not willing to fund our children, for example. So yeah, it's crazy.
And who benefits is the question. And of course, the only people who really benefit are the stockholders.
Yeah,
and
the 1%.
The war manufacturing,
yes,
all the
stockholders of Raytheon, of L3 Harris.
Yes. Well, May Day is coming up, and I think we have to remember, you know, there's more of us working people than there are, you know, of the 1%. I mean, we really do have more power, and we need to use it and come out en masse.
And I think we take courage from that election just recently in Wisconsin, where Elon Musk brought his billions of dollars and lost.
Right.
You know,
that's right.
So it is important for us to celebrate these victories.
Yes.
You know, and to say, well, if they can do it in Wisconsin, for goodness sakes, can't we do it in Massachusetts? Can't we do it in the Congress? And I think, you know, on Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you, Paki, for helping us get together and talk about this very important issue. Which, you know, and
you're
how
welcome. I think, you know, I often think that the places who will really get what matters is community television and community radio, because we're not owned by the corporations, and we're not beholden to the corporations.
That's right, and we still have free speech.
We do, and we have to just keep that. Use it. Yes, keep reminding people that we have this First Amendment, and we can get angry with a lot of things our founding fathers, our forefathers did, but we'll say, let's hear it for the First Amendment.
So educate, organize, and push back. Those are my mottos. Yeah. And definitely get your information from other sources besides the mainstream media.
Right.
I think the part of the pushback is reminding us, is joining with everybody who is standing against what this administration is doing. That there is no issue that is for justice that's not my issue.
Right.
That historically has been the wedge.
That's right.
You know, that's not my issue. No, we don't have the luxury of not having that issue.
Right.
Yeah. And we're stronger in solidarity with others.
Here. Yes. Yeah.
So don't be
Hopefully
afraid.
we're evolving as a species, because sometimes it looks like not so much.
Yeah.
But if we're evolving, maybe this time we'll catch the tyrants and make their lives, make them change their ways, because we can't continue to live this way and when the millions suffer like the Gazans who are suffering as they are, and all of Palestine. I fear for the future of Palestine. I honestly don't know that they're going to survive as an entity, but the Palestinians will survive.
Yes.
That we know.
Yes.
Yeah.
So may we share in their samud,
Yes.
in their resilience, in their resistance, in their courage, because that's where we get it too, don't we?
Yes.
You know, from hearing their stories that you were referring to, and remembering.
And not forgetting to create. That's the other thing that amazes me about my friends in Palestine. They're not just hunkering down because it's become dangerous. They're also taking care of feeding their neighbors, recreating their children, creating museums, supporting artists and poets. They're doing all that at the same time.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that is so beautiful and so essential. So we need to do that too. We need to find the ways that we can be creative and upbeat and joyful, and
Absolutely.
Because we have to keep going. We can't just be depressed.
Yeah.
That's it. So so that I love that quote. The opposite of war is not peace. The opposite of war is creativity.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
You can't kill culture.
No, and so the song, dance, celebrate being alive.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I really thank you both for being guests on this program, and I expect that our listeners, our watchers, have learned a lot, and you've certainly been generous with your time. And,
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Paki and Sherrill. It's wonderful
you.
to be with you both.
Yeah.
Same here.